Hello, my name is Dr. Anita Kuhnley. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Virginia, and I'm also a counselor educator. I train clinical mental health counselors, school counselors, pastoral counselors, and licensed marriage and family therapists at a Christian university in the state of Virginia. And I'm here to talk with you today about the neighborhood. What do you think of when you think of the neighborhood? Maybe you think of the place where you spend most of your time. Maybe you think of your office mates, your neighbors there. Maybe you think of your actual neighbors, your next door neighbors within your neighborhood. Maybe you think of Mr. Rogers. Maybe you think of him waltzing into his television home, changing into one of his cardigan sweaters as he sang, "Would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor?" and issued this wonderful invitation to become his neighbor. Well, one thing that a lot of people don't know about Mr. Rogers was that he was a minister, a Presbyterian minister. He went to seminary on his lunch breaks, and he also took a counseling course with Dr. Margaret McFarland, who supervised his work with a child. And he enjoyed working with her. She worked among key figures in developmental psychology like Erik Erikson and Benjamin Spock. And so after that course, Dr. McFarland became someone who would change Mr. Rogers' life. She became a mentor for many years to come. That mentoring relationship never really ended. He recorded their sessions, he took notes on them, and he credited her as one of the greatest influences in his life. And one of the things that Dr. McFarland taught Mr. Rogers was that feelings are mentionable and manageable. And the idea that anything is human, anything that is human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable is manageable. During these uncertain times, we know that a lot of people are struggling with mood regulation, with anger, with frustration, with depression, with anxiety and fear. And Mr. Rogers believed that we could create a safer world for the children of tomorrow if only we could help children learn how to mention or talk about their feelings and to manage them. And that it was okay to do that. Have any of you ever heard messages like, put a smile on your face, turn that frown upside down? Or what about, don't complain or I'll give you something to complain about? Unfortunately, I know many of us have grown up with messages like this, but the idea behind these messages can be your feelings are not mentionable and they're not manageable unless they're positive. But Mr. Rogers believed that there were appropriate ways that children could express these emotions. One of the things he did personally was he would pound out angry feelings on the piano. And he wrote many of the songs that were played on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and many of the scripts and did the puppets. And he had creative outlets for expressing himself. And he believed that if we could help children to do the same, we would make this a safer world for tomorrow. One of the key themes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was inviting others to be your neighbor, embracing neighbors. He often had visitors and guests on his show. And he always began his show with that invitation to be his neighbor. And how is it that here we are in 2020, 17 years after the death of Mr. Rogers, and yet we are still having movies coming out about his life? We had a wonderful documentary, a movie with Tom Hanks, a whole host of different books about Mr. Rogers and his life story, a great documentary by Maxwell King, my most recent book, The Mr. Rogers Effect. How could it be that 17 years after his death, a minister who was on public television with a low budget set, producing television for children and their parents, is still having an influence? Well, I believe that Mr. Rogers was anointed, and his faith was something that informed his work, but also he was well trained, and his work with Dr. Margaret McFarland really informed most everything he did on his program. he harnessed some key psychological principles and used those in his interactions with children to be able to connect virtually. And today, during these uncertain times where we're using different platforms like Zoom, WebEx, FaceTime, Google Meetup, and all these other online forums, before these were even on the horizon, Mr. Rogers, in the early days of television, was using a virtual means of reaching his population, his television neighbors, as he liked to call us. And he was doing so effectively and in a way that would make a lasting, leave a lasting impression, a lasting influence to help people love their neighbor. And he also was willing to challenge the status quo. He was willing to, for example, he invited Francois Clemens, and he cast him in for the first time, an African-American recurring role on children's television. And so he wanted Officer Clemens to be in a role of authority and in a respected role on his program. And during a time when African Americans were being chased out of swimming pools, where chemicals were being poured into those pools, he invited Officer Clemens to his pool. And not only that, but he helped spray his feet. Officer Clemens didn't have a towel. He dried Officer Clemens' feet. And those that come from a Christian worldview can see the parallel here between Jesus washing his disciples' feet the night of the Last Supper. And so Mr. Rogers was willing to go against the grain and love his neighbor and invite us along for the ride, along for the journey, to love our neighbors as ourselves. He loved to ask his neighbors a very important question that I would like to ask you today. And that question is, who is it that has loved you into becoming? Loved you into becoming or being who you are today? Let's take, if you would, please, just about 5 seconds to think of them now. Thank you. And the people that you thought of, they may be close by. They may even be in the room with you right now, or they may be far away. They may live at a distance, or they may even be on the other side of eternity in heaven. But I encourage you to take a moment to think about how happy they would be to know you thought of them. And this was something that Mr. Rogers left with all of those that he spoke with. Anytime he got a chance to speak on television, in a graduation speech, a graduation ceremony, he loved to encourage people to think of those who loved them into being. I wonder if he himself thought of his grandpa McFeely, who told him often, "Freddie, you've made this day a special day just by your being you. There's no one else in the world like you, and I like you just the way you are." He took this blessing that his grandfather spoke over him, and he shared it in many of his television programs over 3 decades, over 30 years in public television, and shared it with children all across America. Even though Mr. Rogers died in 2003, in 2020, 17 years later, we are still experiencing the therapeutic effect and benefit from his work. So I set out on a quest with a team of experts to unpack the key psychological principles that informed Mr. Rogers' work and how it is that he was able to reach children through his television ministry. We were able to uncover the top 7 key psychological themes and unpack easy to implement strategies that you and I can use to interact with and reach others, to bring out the best in them and have a therapeutic effect, just like Mr. Rogers did. And these are highlighted and broken down in the text, the Mr. Rogers effect, 7 secrets to bringing out the best in yourself and others from America's beloved neighbor. I pray that you've been blessed by this time together. I thank you for taking the time to watch and for reading this magazine. God bless you.